Y'all, we live in difficult times. There's war, political unrest, the pandemic, poverty, families being torn, communities ripped by gun violence and people dying every day, police, injustice. It's all bringing so much pain. But y'all, we can look inside our minds and we can understand who we are, become better, and do this thing like we've never done it before. But it all starts with our mental health, and I know we can do it. I believe in you because I believe in me, and I believe in us. Da 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 da. Don't give up the fight. Welcome to another episode of Therapy is Life, where thinking, feeling, and experiencing well-being is what we do. Today, we're going to be talking about global warming. And I have a special guest all the way from Houston, Texas, Bradford Buds.
How you doing? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. You know, y'all, today we're going to be talking about, that's right, global warming. You know, as a therapist, I've been for quite some time now, but in the last 10 years, I've been coming across more people who have been expressing anxiety about the idea or global warming, people who are experiencing grief as a result of global warming, because there's a landscape change in the environment. Maybe they were exposed to wildfires or tornadoes or hurricanes. They have lost something. Maybe rising sea levels and water levels have destroyed their homes. But it even goes further, because when people are displaced, when these major things happen, people are oftentimes may even experience PTSD. Wow, yes, we don't think about it, but when tornadoes hit and people lose their homes, or hurricanes come in and people lose everything, being in those type of experiences, just witnessing it can affect us physically and emotionally. And we want to talk about global warming, and we want to talk a little bit about how it affects us psychologically. And we want to learn a little bit today about maybe some things that we can do to help do our part to help curb carbon production, or our, as they would say, our carbon footprint. And what are some technologies and what's some things out there we can push for in our society to help improve the situation? But before we get too deep off into that, Mr. Butts, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you interested in this subject. I know you're an engineer, but give us a little bit more insight and understanding.
So from a kid, I've been an animal freak, right? I watched, it doesn't exist anymore, but I watched this show growing up called Mutual of Omaha, Animals Kingdom, right? And you get a good look of animals and their habitat, natural as well as affected by humans, right? So, I learned really early on how we do what we do has an effect really around the world. It's a matter of being responsible to our environment, responsible to our community, and basically responsible for ourselves. So, looking at the potential extinction of certain animals and even people, actually to that effect. There was a guy, I can't remember the tribe, but in South America who died about 4, maybe 5 years ago. He's the last of his kind, which is crazy, right, to think of. And the global warming effect of, clearing forests for consuming all these trees, which are a major source of oxygen, right, that we need to help combat carbon dioxide contribution into the greenhouse gases that are creating the global warming in and of itself. So I've always been kind of interested in it. And then, with my engineering degree, with the role that I played developing mobile phones and pretty much rocking those all over the world, I've had a chance to understand and appreciate how technology's dependency on certain materials, and particularly some conflict minerals, actually have obviously a negative impact on us as a people across the continent of Africa, but people in general. So, seeing our hand in the experience, seeing my own hand in said experience, just giving me a interesting perspective on what's really happening when you see that, polar bears are dying. Why is
Right, right. Gotcha.
there's a domino effect that's there that ends up resulting in being experienced in areas that aren't really the major contributors, right? For the greenhouse gases, for the carbon dioxide, what have you, and they're being evidenced in areas that don't have control. Uh,
Right,
and
right, right,
like the tail wagging a dog, right? So most recently, I became a part of an energy technology company whose focus is, leveraging its proprietary technology for, I'll say, reducing our carbon footprint on one hand, generating green renewable energy on another hand, and as well as working to facilitate decentralized energy with fuel cells, basically getting off the grid, right? And being in a sustainable position without that dependency. So it's a long road for all that, but there's some real in hand opportunities really to step into that and make a difference today.
Mm, that sounds so amazing. You know, we want to get into that a little bit more, but you were talking about your early experiences and watching Mutual Omaha Wild Kingdom, and I remember watching that show as a kid. I remember watching that show as a kid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
always talking about lions and tigers and hyenas and oh my god, that
Yeah.
was that. I felt like that was like my first connection with like um the jungle
Mhm.
and wildlife in a deeper sense, and in the way, of course, the way they lived, and I felt like as a kid, unfortunately though, I was I was in an environment where it felt like, as it almost felt like, as human beings, it was like our given right to be able to use the earth and to use the resources of the earth. You think about the ideas that's presented in Genesis, and how men, they we had the ability to name all the animals and all the different species, like it was ours, like it was given for our use. And then you think about the ideas, and but when I got older, I began to realize, like, oh, like he was talking about, like our behavior actually affects the environment, and sometimes you might even think that we're like the quote unquote, hate to say this, like the cancer that
It-
is hurting the earth. And I know we don't want to think like that. We want to avoid, disassociate, and ignore that possibility. But it feels like all those little insects and stuff that we want to step on, there's
well,
a they have a particular reason
of
for
being
being.
there, right? There's a purpose for the
They
dung
seem to
beetle.
have a purpose. But we sometimes, I guess, we just get so hedonistic in our own feelings and emotions and doing what we do. We don't necessarily think about like how our behavior actually could be harmful to the earth. So before we get too deep off into this though,
Right.
man, I heard you say something about polar bears, man. Tell me something about, let's talk a little bit about some sea animals that you really find interesting. I saw you, I heard you say something earlier about a polar bears. What's some other
Well, number
animals that you
one,
really enjoy?
number one are orcas.
The orcas.
For sure. Orcas number one, polar bears, leopard seals, and penguins, of course. Right.
Gotcha.
But orcas,
Orcas, because they smart as I don't know what. Is that's what
they're
that's about?
arguably the most intelligent entity on the planet, save us, and maybe excess of us, because we know nothing about them. Right.
Yeah.
They actually are the only other species, or at least say maybe chimpanzees, that actually have a culture.
Mm.
Cultures, I should say, plural. Right.
Mm.
So, and like anything else, they depend on the planet to be healthy.
Exactly.
Right.
And blue whales do too.
And blue whales do too, right? The
And
food chain, like
penguins, they do too.
yeah, exactly. So the level of consistency, the harmony that we used to live with and in with the planet that existed, you could argue pre-colonization across Africa and the Western continent, that harmony doesn't really exist anymore, right? To the tune that you were speaking about before, like our existence on the planet, if you look at the start of human beings on the planet and the progression through to today, we really replicate a pests more than anything else, right? We're over consuming, right?
Yeah, over consuming, over consuming.
Over consuming. So, I mean, but you look at that, what's impacting the oceans, and we don't really appreciate the oceans because we don't live there, even though it's 2/3 of the planet, right?
Yeah.
Well,
And
yeah,
it's nothing more fascinating than the sea turtles and see how they move, man. It's it's fascinating to watch them. But know that not just what we're talking about today, but also like the plastics that get thrown into the water and everything, how it's hurting them.
there is this plastic pool of pollution floating in the ocean that is the size of Rhode Island.
What?
Somehow, yeah, somehow it's come collected together. It's amazing how it's happened. It's amazingly dangerous too that it exists, and it's only growing.
Mm. And with hearing that, I bet hopefully somebody tomorrow will be a little bit more intentional with getting rid of their plastic.
Yeah, it's important how we manage, what we consume and the leftovers, right, from that
Yeah, right, exactly. That would take care of stuff. And so thank you for sharing that about the animals, the sea animals. I love the sea turtles, the orcas, the dolphins.
True.
I'm very fascinated by them. I'm also fascinated by like coral and
Yeah.
you know I understand in talking about carbon. Let's talk about what it is, but let's talk about specifically how it impacts ocean life.
So specifically carbon dioxide, right?
Mhm,
It's the not just the moniker, it's the banner upon which all of this environmental stewardship is happening presently, right? Stemming
mhm,
from this Paris agreement, right? That I can't remember the number of countries that are contributing to that, somewhere in the order of 180 some odd countries, if I remember
mhm,
correctly, almost everybody. But carbon dioxide, people understand and appreciate your exhaust coming out of your automobile, right?
mhm,
When you think about the mechanics of business and productivity,
mhm,
cement making produces carbon dioxide. Coal burning produces massive carbon dioxide, right? Ethanol production, which is a benefit to being blended with gasoline, ethanol production produces carbon dioxide, right? Every
mhm,
metric ton of ethanol produces an equal amount of carbon dioxide. Same thing for cement. So these industries are big business.
mhm.
And there was it, I think something to the tune of 37 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide were produced last year, 2020.
Mm,
We're on pace to do the same thing this year. The US, since inception of, I believe it was 1850, of the first assessment of carbon dioxide production in the world, the US has produced more carbon dioxide than any other market on the planet today. China presently is outpacing the US, I think, to the order of maybe 6-1. And by the end of the decade, for sure, quite possibly within the next 3 years, depending on how well their fuel cell, their nuclear projects actually do come online, they're going to surpass US as the largest producer on record, right? They're the largest producer presently, but on record to date, historically, they're going to pass us very, very soon. So you look at and what are these industries? These industries are industry. I'm sorry,
right,
these industries are energy, right?
right.
What do we need? We need energy, right? Food,
Exactly.
yes. Water, yes. Sunlight, yes. We need energy for how we live. And part of this overconsumption is driving us to overconsume our ability to supply energy. You look at all these blackouts. You have these rolling brownouts here in Texas, especially. You have these rolling brownouts. They don't have sufficient supply of energy for the types of energy one they consume. They're renewables, wind, solar. There's a little bit of nuclear. There's a little bit of coal burning, right? And then you get your natural gas, right? Contributors, and it fluctuates over the course of the day, right? The sun is rocking when the sun is rocking. When it's down, that's zero, right?
Right.
So what do you do? And you're looking to build up reserves, but when you don't have sufficient reserve for the demand that you have, then you've got either a controlled brownout situation or you have an effective blackout situation, right?
Right.
So
Right.
the grid is critical, and the grid is potentially at risk, right, of being infiltrated, right? At the same time, it's at risk because it's not very efficient.
Right.
So we look at
Right.
solar sources, and I mean, the sun is shining and rocking all day, and the energy from
Mm-hmm.
the sun is very, very strong. But for that to be utilized, it's converted into electricity, and that's where the losses are. So if you
Right.
minimize the losses in that conversion, you're maximizing your ability to use electricity that hasn't been generated from these other sources. You're burning coal to generate electricity. If you didn't need to burn as much coal, you wouldn't produce as much carbon dioxide from coal burning, right?
Right. Exactly.
So
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
and yeah, and as a result, because all that was really good, and as a result, the because we're overproducing carbon dioxide, then I understand it affects the pH of the ocean, which then harms sea life.
I mean, there's a domino effect in multiple dimensions, right? So, in where
Mhm.
you're going, in addition to carbon dioxide, is 70% of the greenhouse gases that are contributed, and the
Okay.
greenhouse gases are what's driving global warming, right?
Hmm.
So, the whole aspect and the reason why there's this Paris Agreement is to maximally allow no more than 2%, sorry, 2 degrees Celsius increase in the global temperature, that global warming effect, and one restricted to
Hey,
1.5.
hey, hold on a second. Let's talk a little bit about how, since we talk about global warming, let's talk a little bit about how carbon actually influences the Earth heating up. Let's.
That's it right there, right? That carbon dioxide getting into the oxygen. I think it was in the 1850s. Don't quote
Mhm.
me. That's I want to say 56, where I believe it was a woman scientist actually identified that this effect is happening. Right? It wasn't flagged as a problem until the 1950s. Right?
Right. So
So,
go ahead.
yeah. So you have this science leading an understanding of the contribution and the effect, and then you finally started getting these flags and flares of, hey, this is going to be a problem, right? In the 1950s, 100 years later, right? This is going to be a problem. And the challenge around that is the source of the contribution to carbon dioxide is coming from industry. And
Right.
industry is predicated on making money. You don't
Right.
have regulation.
Right. So I just want to make sure I understand this. So what happens is when the sun produces heat,
Yes.
and so that heat tries to escape the Earth, carbon catches the heat in the atmosphere and holds it, which then leads to the Earth being warmer,
Indeed. Like a blanket.
like a
Like a
blanket.
blanket you don't
Exactly.
need. Right? Like a blanket you don't need at the beach.
Right.
Right?
Okay. There you go. So yeah. So by us producing more carbon, which affects the ocean, it affects the pH balance of the ocean, which ends up killing like the a lot of sea life, like we were talking about the
Polar bears,
coral and
coral.
even crab and lobster and animals like that. As the pH balance of the ocean it becomes more ionized, it affects their ability to develop.
As the
Right.
pH balance becomes more ionized, as the water temperature increases, and as the exposure to the sun, so the coral is very sensitive, right?
Right.
Coral cannot and will not grow everywhere. And where it's growing right now, it's being compromised because there's too much exposure to the sun because of water levels changing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the pH levels changing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing the coral actually die off, which is a very dangerous thing. That ecosystem is very delicate. And there are a lot of things that feed off of that. I mean, that food chain rocks around the world. Just
Gotcha. And some of the animals in the ocean help get rid of some of the carbon, right?
indeed they do, right?
So
But how there again, you go back to harmony, right? There's only in every entity serves a purpose, right?
mm-hmm.
if you're overproducing a component, that there are natural biological entities that actually do consume that to help manage it. There aren't enough of them.
Mm,
And they too
exactly.
turn food for something else, right? So
Right.
there aren't enough of them. So you look at what can we do? I might be skipping ahead a little bit, but
Hmm.
they're
Yeah. Before we get like what we can do, I wanted to talk a little bit more about like this understanding. So we understand like how carbon kind of affects like the ocean, and we understand how it traps heat, and we understand that a lot of corporations that are involved, and there's a lot of over consumption that's contributing to it. But I think a lot of times, because it's not hitting us in our face, like we're not feeling it, because I think human beings, we're hedonistic, and oftentimes when things are not hitting us in our face, we don't feel like it's real. but
yes.
but I wanted to talk about some specific examples that might, we could argue that are the results of of global warming. And I know we were talking earlier about some of the number one, third world countries that have been affected by flooding because of the melting of the glaciers.
Yeah, so third world countries in a really interesting position where they're somehow, and particularly island nations, third
Hmm.
world countries, they're getting the butt end of the stick like nobody's business, right? So I believe the Prime Minister of Barbados, Prime Minister Motley, she's been very outspoken and has raised several proposals around organizing, effectively group funding, um, money for these types of nations to be able to fight these effects. They don't control. You don't have massive cement producers and steel producers right on these islands. And yet, as the carbon dioxide gets into the environment and floats around, it's centering itself for some reason, kind of like that Rhode Island size pollution that's sitting out in the ocean. It's centering itself for some reason into these island nations, and
Mm,
they're getting the butt end of it. And I read somewhere that is actually a pretty interesting term that global warming is effectively a threat multiplier in environments and societies such as this, where you have, whether it's health issues, whether you have educational issues, whether you have financial disparity issues, and particularly where it's impacting women, it's doubling and tripling down on those effects in these areas. They
mm,
have tons of data to be able to prove it. So it's very dangerous in those realms. And then what is their resource and recourse? Their industry is tourism. They're not necessarily driven by technology, not necessarily driven by innovation and these other things that you'd want to be able to put some weight behind and some investment in to help get them out from underneath this nasty curve. So they're dependent upon people being accountable to their contribution towards the Paris Agreement to actually curb global warming, curb your overture and your overconsumption, right? And
right. And so thinking about that, what would you say? I saw when I was looking at some of your notes that you had New Orleans. You
yeah, your sea level is rising. New Orleans is already under sea level. Not a lot. That's my city. It's
yeah,
there a little bit. So you're concerned about these coastal areas where what is the recourse? Are you going to evacuate New Orleans in 5 years' time? That's a pretty. I mean, we couldn't get New Orleans evacuated for hurricanes coming through, and the season's coming up, and these hurricanes are actually worse than what they used to be. It's not so much that the storm damage is so great; it's that the storms are slower moving for some reason, and they're bigger, right? So
right, right,
what we
right,
did here in Houston when I was here a few years back, the deal wasn't the hurricane; it was the rain that stayed here, sat here. It literally walked through Gulfport, Texas.
You being an engineer, one of the things that I was doing some reading on that, and one of the things I thought was fascinating, they said that the way we build buildings, particularly in cities that's um, that's near large body of waters,
Hmm.
those buildings can actually prohibit the the storms from being able to move properly, which will lead to like the rain lingering and stuff, and having more issues.
Oh
Have
yeah,
you have you ever heard anything like that before?
I have. It's. I like to think there's a ton of experimental things that are going on right now to figure out how to use materials in a better way.
Mhm.
Whether it's there's a lot of wood being used, not really in this area though. That's like in the Midwest. You're seeing like particularly there's this building in Milwaukee. I think it's kind of state of the art right now for
Mhm.
uh, leveraging wood rather than cement, right?
Mm.
For its structure, and I think it's sizable. It's supposed to be something like I think a 20-story building, but we've got to be more creative. We've got to be more responsible at the same time. And the reality of the situation is, unfortunately, too, it's got to be a set of solutions that make money, right? I mean, the bottom line is, particularly in this market, probably more so than others, corporations aren't going to move unless they're able to make money doing it. And you
Mm.
got the EPA on the fire. You got Cancer Alley down there, between the swing between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. All these chemical companies producing these carbon oxides as well as other contaminants that people are contracting cancer like nobody's business in that arena. And EPA was suing them before the current administration got into place, and then they dropped the suit. Right. So now start talking about the politicization of global warming and its effect and business and money making and where the controls are. And
Right. You, we started thinking about all that. Like it just brings you down because you realize that humanity is always at the whims of somebody's pocketbook,
indeed,
and that is so unfortunate because our sense of morality is guided by our pocketbook and not people.
yes, yes,
Look, so I know like last year, or over the last year, Ohio had like 65 or more tornadoes in like a 6 months period from like
okay,
January to June, which was like a record, I believe. And you see all the tornadoes that's going on like in Oklahoma, but it seems like our tornado alley is like getting larger.
right,
And of course, he was talking earlier about going back to hurricanes, and I think about the one we had last year in North Carolina, Asheville, how I got ripped apart. And I have family who lived there, and it
right.
was saying how hard it was for them. And we might not always realize that, yeah, when people go through things like this, yeah, they can have some serious PTSD. There's a lot of adjusting and dealing with your home being destroyed
Hmm.
because of inclement weather.
Hmm.
And we bring in this up because human behavior is influencing the weather.
It is.
It is influencing the weather. I'm curious, knowing what you know and having the experiences that you've had. I know I heard you say earlier that they started tracking carbon emissions back in the 1800s,
1850.
1850, and then by the time we get into the 1950s, before it could even be politicized, there was concerns about how it would affect the earth.
Yes,
Listen, we've been talking about it, but can we just kind of delineate concisely what those things are? With um, I know we were talking earlier about the melting of the glaciers, right?
the
And
effects.
if we
Yes.
have the melting of the glaciers, then because the glaciers help reflect the light from the sun,
Mhm.
then that would also lead to the earth warming.
Well, and the reason why they're not reflecting as much anymore is because they're getting dirty. Right? Carbon dioxide in the environment is actually causing these glaciers to be dirty. And as they're getting dirty,
Ah,
they're getting dark. And
uh,
darkness is absorbing the heat. So it's accelerating the glaciers melting.
so they say they're getting dirty and they're getting
Yeah.
dirty.
Yeah.
What is causing them to get dirty?
The carbon dioxide in the air,
Okay,
right?
got
It's a horrible multiplier on multiple fronts, right? I've seen some wonderful imagery of some of the glaciers 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and then within the last couple few years. And they're reduced like they didn't even exist.
right. Right. And a lot of times we don't even realize that with the glaciers melting, there's also this release of gases
Yep.
that we may not think about, like methane.
Yep. Yep. So it's a nasty problem, and allegedly this report that I was reading that CNN published, 40% of the glaciers are already trapped in a state of disrepair. If we were to achieve the Paris Agreement today, right,
Mhm.
right, we wouldn't be able to reverse the effects on 40% of the glaciers. You talk about
Gotcha.
fresh water source, you talk about sea levels, you talk about water temperatures. It's a really aggressive situation to get your mind around and understand the effect. A is real,
Hmm.
scientifically not just proven, demonstrated, supported, validated, and then B, it's our fault. Right? We
Hey, you know what? I want to get a little more into that, but I'm in Cleveland, right? And
right,
it's the second day of fall. It was like 75, 80 degrees today. It's nice. And you know,
right,
people here is like, yeah, well, I'm feeling this. I like this weather. You know, not last year, but not last winter, but the year before. I mean, the winter was. I mean, the winter was real nice. Didn't really have many cold days, and I ain't gonna talk too much about that because I ain't trying to bring the
you
hawk.
trying to bring it
I,
up.
I ain't trying to bring the hawk, but we're celebrating the warmer days, and but yet at the same time, a little over a year ago, the fires from Canada was coming down, and we could smell all the forest fires, because Canada was having record heat, and it was having a lot of dry forests, which
Yep.
led to a lot of forest fires, which was coming all the way down through Ohio.
Yeah. No, the earth
The-
cycles things, everything.
What'd you
So
say?
the earth cycles everything. That's not going to stay in Canada.
It's not going to stay in Canada. So, and then they're having record temperatures, and they're having people dying from heat strokes, and you know they don't use they haven't had to use air conditioning like we use down here because they haven't had that type of heat. Also learning that in a little over a year ago, like not this past winter, but the year before, only a very small percentage of the Great Lakes ever froze during the winter.
And it's a problem. I mean, so I grew up in Cleveland, right?
Right, you live
So
here.
this time of year, we're getting close to our first snowfall.
Mhm.
That was common. We trick or treating the snow, right up to your knees. But as much as you may like the warmer weather, it's actually not good for the environment where you are. You think about maple trees. Like I think something like 70% of the maple comes from Canada.
Mm,
Bro. You may have maple trees everywhere, but you don't have the conditions for it, right?
mhm.
Overnight freeze with the warmth during the day. And those disruptions reverberate everywhere. They just are experienced in different areas. So yeah, maybe it's cooler or it's warmer in Cleveland at times where the onset of winter should be coming and people are like, oh great, they don't have the snow. But that environment is supposed to get snow.
Exactly.
Right? It's supposed to get snow then, right?
Yeah, and then you start seeing insects and bugs, like
They're confused, right?
that. Yeah, that that wouldn't normally be here because the ecology is changing
Exactly.
because it's getting warmer.
Yeah.
So look, one of the things I loved about coming farther north was I grew up in the South, right? And when
Right.
you had a cookout, I want to make sure I use the word cookout and not that other word. Man, look, couldn't hardly be there for the flies. You had to have everything covered. But one thing I appreciated about coming here was in the summer, you could have a cookout
Right.
and you could have it lightly covered, and not a whole bunch of flies and bees all over the place. And it's like, it's so different. Well,
Yeah.
because I experienced that, I saw it firsthand. I've been in both worlds, right?
Right.
And people don't think about those little subtle things, how they really change.
They do. They do. Yeah, I mean, they have drastic effects, right? Like even down here, we're at a cornerstone for monarch butterflies, right? So their traditional migration from Canada across North America down through right here, Gulfport, Texas, and they don't go around the Horn in Mexico to get to Central America. They cut across the Gulf. So I remember when, again, Mutual of Omaha, right? Way back when, I remember seeing these masses of monarch butterflies that would collect here before they say, okay, we're ready. They fed enough, they got enough energy, and they're going to go ahead and go across the Gulf. And you barely see them. We saw one today, actually, coming back and picking my kids up from school, right? You barely see them, and they should be in masses, right? So all these little effects actually have a very strong cascading effect right around the world, and it's just a matter, like you said. So one, how do you experience it? Two, where do you experience it? Three, what are you doing about it? If you understand there's something for us to do.
Hang tight, y'all. This is your friendly neighborhood therapist, Gerald McGee, and we're going to continue this global warming discussion in the next episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe and drop your comments in the comment section